Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. 3:30 today, this hour, we're joined by Ed Morrissey. We'll talk to him about DOGE and all of the cutting that they're doing. Ronald Mortensen joins us at 4 o'clock, the former Assistant Secretary of State. We'll chat with him about how DOGE can accelerate deportations. It can be done. They can expedite it. And then Pat Harity will join us, the Fairfax County Supervisor, candidate for Lieutenant Governor in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's at 5:30. We will talk to him about an out-of-control Commonwealth's attorney called Steve Descano, who's a disaster, and Pat Harity has an idea on how to handle him. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL.
I would think liberals would love the fact that you have the biggest electric vehicle company in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be adored by the left, you know.
Yeah, not anymore.
Less so these days.
He killed that, huh?
I mean, less so.
I really didn't.
Well, I mean, this whole sort of like, you know, they call it like Trump Derangement Syndrome. Yeah. And I didn't, you don't realize how real this is until like you can't reason with people. So like I was at a friend's birthday party in LA, just a birthday dinner, and it was like a nice, quiet dinner, and everyone was behaving normally. And then I happened to mention, this is before the election, like a month or two before, I happened to mention the president's name. And it was like they got shot with a dart in the jugular that contained like methamphetamine and rabies, okay? And they're like, wow! And I'm like, what is wrong? Guys, like, you can't have like a normal conversation.
The left has rabies. Yes, the frothing at the mouth continues all over President Trump merely being in office. And what is he doing? Making the government more efficient, leading to people who were protesting against government efficiency yesterday in Washington, D.C., which is both hilarious and pathetic. That was taking place. It was President's Day. It was a perfectly nice day. It was a holiday, and they decided that their Trump Derangement Syndrome was too much. They had to go out and protest against government efficiency yesterday. But Elon Musk, you hear him there in a conversation with Fox News' Sean Hannity, saying that, yeah, the left used to love me. They used to adore me. I was the electric vehicle guy. They were all on my side. They thought it was the coolest thing ever. They like when rich people are on their side. They've got a lot of rich people on their side. But Elon is now a defector. And if you defect from the left, well, the plan is to destroy you. So the left no longer not only has Trump Derangement Syndrome, as Elon pointed out, they also have Elon derangement. They have ED. Yes, it's a big problem on the left. They have immense amounts of ED going on right now. And they have impotent rage as a result of that. They're very angry about what's going on. And look, the left, it's funny, actually. It's an enjoyable era because you're watching as the left does have this impotent rage. They're gesticulating wildly and achieving nothing. And here's John Kennedy, Senator John Kennedy, on Fox describing his advice that he'd like to give to the left, unsolicited.
In terms of the Democrats, I've got a lot of friends who are Democrats, and they haven't asked me for advice. But if I did, I'd tell them, look, you just got to try harder not to suck.
Just try harder not to suck. That's a good piece of advice. Let's begin with don't suck anymore. Stop it. Maybe become more sane, more rational, speak to things that people actually care about, and stop attacking Trump all the time, who is, by the way, the most popular he's ever been as president or even as a candidate for president of the United States. His popularity is off the charts. His approval is off the charts. People like this government spending being cut. They're not getting exercised on behalf of Democrats that it's occurring. They love it. So what has the left's response been? Well, we heard from earlier this week from the chairman of the DNC, the new chairman of the DNC. Still nobody knows his name. But he was on MSNBC this week, and he was saying, well, the real problem is our messaging. We just have to do better at messaging. This is the thing they always say. And also on MSNBC, they had a New York Times columnist by the name of Mara Gay, and she said, it is our job to control your mind, that is the minds of the American people, when it comes to the Department of Government Efficiency. Listen to her.
All of this is being done, just slashing and burning, to essentially prepare the country for Donald Trump's tax cuts to the wealthy. And there's got to be a way to pay for that. And what's going to happen is that everyday Americans in their everyday lives are paying for it already. We're seeing it in, government services that are going to suffer already. We've been seeing that the FAA is really not up to the mark at the moment. They're being gutted. Medicaid, Medicare.
So 4 weeks into Trump's presidency, the conclusion is that he destroyed the FAA, and the reason these planes are coming down all around the planet is because of Donald Trump and the FAA. We'll get to this in a little more detail coming up in the show, but you see they're even blaming the hard landing in Toronto yesterday that led to a Delta plane turning over onto its head, 80 people on that flight, all of whom survived by the grace of God. It's being blamed on President Trump. It didn't even happen in American airspace. It happened in Canadian airspace in Toronto, and CNN and MSNBC are blaming Trump. Or if they're not blaming him directly, they're using this sleight of hand that uses the fact that multiple events have occurred, therefore they must be connected. Oh, President Trump is firing people at the FAA. This is the phrase they'll use, this comes as a plane crashes in Toronto, or they'll usually do it in reverse. A plane has crashed in Toronto. This comes as President Trump is firing people at the FAA. It is the most amateurish form of misdirection and magic trickery you've ever seen, where they try and slander Donald Trump, and they try to exploit a situation wherein either people are dying or on the verge of dying potentially. And, this is a good opportunity. Let's hurt Trump with it. What happened in Canada? Never mind the details. We're going to hurt Trump with it. And MSNBC's, the New York Times has Mara Gay saying in that clip I just played that we have to tell you that this is hurting the American people. Got that? Stopping federal spending hurts you, is what she insists. Meanwhile, once again, it's the opposite. In fact, out of control federal spending that was funded either by taking it from taxpayers or printing the money entirely, has led to a direct impact on your life in the form of higher prices everywhere. Higher prices everywhere. The reason people pay more for everything now is because of out-of-control government spending and printed money to support it. That's the story of the Biden years. So President Trump is coming in and saying, no, we're taking a machete to federal spending. And so every time you hear this false frame, and you're going to hear it again, probably this weekend on the Sunday shows, they're going to say something, but when do we get to bringing down prices for the American people? How are we going to bring prices down, Mr. President? And not a question that they asked the Biden administration. Never. It was never asked. It was like, look, the Biden administration is slowing down inflation, they would crow, slowing down inflation. As our friend and economist E.J. Antoni points out, every time you heard that from the headlines, what they were really saying is prices set a record high again this month, slowing down inflation. They would play games with the math. They would suggest that a declining rate of change means it wasn't going up still. Of course it was. Prices kept going up under Biden throughout his entire presidency. They never came down once. And so now you have them saying, how are you going to bring costs down? The answer to that question lies directly in the middle of DOGE's mission. Cut government spending, stop printing money, make the nation's books make sense. Elon Musk wants to make it so that when a federal employee stares at an expenditure, they know what the money was spent on. How difficult is this? They've been reporting that they have countless expenditures that they're finding in the books of the federal government that have nothing written in the line where it's designated for the purpose of the cash. Do you run your house this way? Do you run your life this way? Does any competent business who wants to stay in business operate this way? No, they don't. They account for every last dollar that they can. It's really important. The federal government doesn't operate the way a business does because, they get away with murder. They get away with just absolute disastrous bookkeeping by design to enrich their friends. There's a lot of corruption going on, a lot of cronyism. President Trump getting control of all of it. That brings us to a clip now that I really want to share with you, which just happened in the last hour or so. This is Stephen Miller of the White House. Stephen Miller is a smart man, and it is good for America that he is once again working with President Trump. Here he is going on CNN. Brianna Kieler is the host for this segment, and she starts trying to once again turn government efficiency into a scandal. And Stephen Miller very slowly, patiently, and, like patronizingly starts telling Brianna Kieler how the Constitution works. Take a listen to this.
Staff for policy. Stephen, thank you so much for taking time for us. So who is in charge of DOGE?
The President of the United States.
He's the administrator of DOGE?
No, the DOGE is what was formerly U.S. Digital Services. It's an agency of the federal government that reports into the Executive Office of the President, which reports to the President of the United States.
Okay.
The way that Article 2 works is the President wins an election, and then he appoints staff, including myself, including Mike Waltz, including Susie Wiles, including Elon Musk, and those staff report to him.
Okay, well aware. So Elon Musk a week ago answered a question about transparency at DOGE. This is how he spoke about DOGE.
Well, we actually are trying to be as transparent as possible. In fact, we post our actions to the DOGE handle on X and to the DOGE website. So all of our actions are maximally transparent.
You hear him there. We post our actions. All of our actions are maximally transparent. Does Elon Musk know he's not in charge of DOGE?
Again, the president runs the government, then the president appoints advisors, including Elon, including myself, including all the other staff here at the White House, and then those staff in turn execute the president's commands and directions to all the agencies of the federal government. This is how democracy works, something that we treasure in America. The whole American people go to the ballot box, they elect the president appoints staff.
Dude, I know you can't see this right now, and it doesn't even matter. Do you know how angry she is that he is dog walking her through the Constitution right now? Right this way. Come here, girl. Let me show you how the Constitution works. Let me show you how this works. You know what Article 2 is? You familiar with Article 2? Do you know what the President of the United States is? Do you know how elections work? Do you know how democracy works? And she's sitting there trying to figure out, what do I do with this? How do I even attempt to salvage any shred of credibility as this guy just absolutely steamrolls me on national television by describing something very basic, which is the president is executing the vision that he was elected for. CNN, which is desperate to turn the idea that Elon Musk working for Trump is a scandal, that's what they're desperate for. Stephen Miller's not allowing them to do that. And it's driving her crazy. Of course, they'll spend the rest of the day trying to recover from this.
The staff that administer his orders and directives across the whole U.S. government.
Okay, Stephen, I get that, but this is important because we want to talk about who's making the decisions here. There were 300 employees of the National Nuclear Security Administration. You know about this. They were fired. The agency had to rescind those terminations because these were employees who were critical to maintaining the nation's nuclear stockpile. So then who is it making those decisions?
I love how they're making this into a huge scandal. Don't you want the government? Don't you want them to overdo it? Overdo it. That's my mandate. If I'm insofar as I'm a Trump voter, maybe you are too. Overdo it. I'd rather err on the side of cut. Err on the side of cut. That's what the American people want. And if all of a sudden we find out, oh, this person's mission essential. Okay, fine. Give that person his job back. That's a better situation, I think.
Decisions of which federal employees are terminated.
Well, in that case, the Secretary of Energy would be the one. So what you're describing with the cuts in the Department of Energy, those are directed by the Senate-confirmed Secretary of Energy.
Okay, so that was the Secretary of Energy's mistake.
Well, I wouldn't use the term mistake. I would say that it's pretty standard when you're downsizing government. You make cuts, you assess those cuts, you see who needs to be rehired, who needs to be kept, who needs to be
That's not what happened here, though, Stephen. You know that.
Literally what happened here. He described it perfectly.
They were rescinded. These aren't normal things. These were terminations that were rescinded.
I understand that even a temporary interruption in federal employment is a great crisis and catastrophe for you and for CNN. What the American people see is a government that is finally delivering a promise of accountability under President Trump. You want to have a conversation about transparency. Let me ask you a question. Do you have any idea where the $22 billion that the Department of Health and Human Services provided to illegal aliens under Joe Biden is right now $22 billion with a B. That's enough to provide a free house to every homeless veteran in America. Where's the $22 billion? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. Joe Biden just spent it, and now it's gone. Transparency begins with having an accounting of where every federal dollar is spent. And God bless President Trump for leading this effort.
Stephen, it seems like the crisis here had to do with the nation's nuclear stockpile. And for these particular federal workers, which I'm not, so this isn't my personal crisis, military members of the Guard
I
and
don't
the
think
Reserve.
it's a crisis,
well,
and you don't think it's well. Hold on. I don't think it's a crisis,
Stephen,
and you don't think it's a crisis. Then why are we talking about it?
No, why are we even talking about this? You don't even think it's that important? Now you're saying she's running away from her insistence that this is absolutely critical? Good for Stephen Miller. And it just once again reminds us that, just have bare bones conversations. Go back to basics with these people when they try and turn everything into a scandal. Who's the president of the United States? Who put him there? What was the wish of the American voter? What is he doing now? Yeah, exactly what they voted for. 322. Shark Tank's Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary. He too was on CNN this week. He thinks DOGE isn't cutting enough, though.
I think the issue is they're not whacking enough. There's this concept in private equity when you get a bankrupt company and you go in there, you cut 20% more than your initial read. And then you find like a pool of mercury, the organization gels back together again. Always cut deeper, harder when there's fat and waste. The FAA, it's not the people. The code is cobalt. It's from the 60s. It needs CapEx put into it for the technology to be upgraded to make it safer. Fat like a chicken. All of these agencies are like big fat chickens dripping over barbecues of fat. This is the best barbecue I've ever seen, but I don't think it's happening fast enough. They're not cutting enough. Keep slashing, keep hacking while you have a 24-month mandate before the midterms. Cut. More cutting. Believe me, it's going to work out just great.
Keep slashing that chicken. It looks delicious. Go for it. Ed Morrissey up next here on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Ronald Mortensen, former Assistant Secretary of State, will be with us. We'll talk to him about how DOGE can actually work to expedite deportations, which is another one of the president's big missions. And then Pat Harity, Fairfax County Supervisor, will chat with us at 5:30. He's also a candidate for Lieutenant Governor in Virginia. He has a way to bring Steve Descano, that out-of-control Soros prosecutor, under control. We'll talk to Pat about that. And we'll talk to you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yesterday in Washington, D.C., anti-government efficiency protesters screaming outside of the United States Capitol building.
Gulf of Mexico! Gulf of Mexico! Gulf of Mexico! Gulf of Mexico!
Now, I don't know what yelling Gulf of Mexico has to do with government efficiency or a lack thereof, but they just don't like Trump, I think, and they don't like winning, and they don't like the Gulf of America for sure. The other piece to look out for is that a lot of major corporations are reeling back their bigotry programs that they've been very proud of the last few years, including Disney, which has announced that they no longer will have trigger warnings in front of Dumbo and Peter Pan for their audiences who may be overly sensitive about the contents of Dumbo and Peter Pan. Joining us now to discuss all of it, Ed Morrissey, the managing editor over at Hot Air and the host of the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Ed, always good to talk to you, sir.
Thank you for having me on.
Sanity seems to be prevailing for the most part.
Well, for the most part, right? I mean, this has been a pretty impressive 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that if Donald Trump had had a first 4 weeks in 2017 like this, he would have won very easily in 2020. And I think he's setting up Republicans pretty well for the midterms.
Yes.
With a lot of this.
You know, the Department of Government Efficiency is one of the rare times the Republicans have associated themselves with a name that actually makes sense. Like usually Washington comes up with these stupid acronyms that nobody can really get their arms around and become invested in. But people understand government efficiency. That's what they want. Isn't it amazing that Trump has figured out how to get the left to protest government efficiency?
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of those really interesting moments, right? Is that you're going to protest over actual scrutiny and actual accountability for trillions of dollars of federal spending. It's really sort of a remarkable moment. There's either two explanations for this. Either they are just doing the automatic gainsay of anything that Donald Trump does, and that's their only response, or they're part of the grift.
Yes.
And I think it could be either, or it could be both at the same time. But if Democrats want to run on you don't deserve to know where your money's going for their midterm message, I welcome them to that.
Yeah, but they're calling this authoritarian. They're acting as if Trump is some sort of, dictator who's trying to assume power unto himself. If so, he's the rare authoritarian who's using his power to strip the government of influence over the American people.
Well, it's not authoritarian. This is an exercise of executive power. The executive branch has always had the authority to scrutinize federal spending and in fact, they have the duty to do that, right? I mean, it's an actual duty. That's part of the executive branch's authority, and that's the reason why judges the last few days have just decided, I think we need to stay out of this because this is really a political question. It's not really a legal question because there's no question. There's no legal question to this. The executive branch has the authority to look at all this spending. Now, the only thing that could cross the line is if Trump seizes money that was specifically appropriated by Congress for a specific purpose. Mm-hmm. That's going to be few and far between.
Yes. In other words, he takes that money and then uses it for some other intent that Congress didn't authorize.
Right. And even then, there's ways around that. We had that with the border wall in the first term and that sort of thing. And, Biden did that too. But for the most part, if Congress has explicitly appropriated money for a specific purpose, then you can't really stop it in the executive branch. And that's the reason why they didn't just shut USAID down. There are some functions in there that are explicitly part of the statutory scheme, and they have to keep those alive. But they can lay off 90% of the workers because it was almost the rest of it was just a slush fund.
Yes.
I would say 90 to 95% of that money was slush fund. And you had 14,000 people at USAID that were, or almost 14,000, that were treating it as a slush fund. They were sending it to their favorite groups, and they were sending it to allies in politics, activists that were going to campaign for progressives. Use the money to employ people who do that type of activity. It's a grift, and they're shutting down the grift. And there's really not a lot that courts can do about that. Congress could do something about it. If there's a program that gets shut down at USAID, and you see this, I mean, this was all the last 2 weekends, right? Tim Kaine goes out there, this is hurting veterans. Really? Which program? Because if you know which program that they're shutting down that hurt veterans, why don't you propose that Congress fund that explicitly?
Yes.
Write a bill. That's what Congress is supposed to do. That's Congress's job. And if they wrote a bill and they got enough votes for it and Donald Trump signed the bill, then that money would be restored.
So
they're not doing that.
And they're doing a lot of conjuring fantasy scenarios right now in order to scare the American people. So, for instance, DOGE is taking a close look at the way that the Social Security Administration operates, and they've discovered that there's all sorts of people who are alleged to be alive who are, like somewhere in the vicinity of 150 years old. Well, it takes 2 seconds to be like, well, that's probably not real. So we should probably clean up this system so it's an accurate reflection of who's supposed to receive money. Let's make sure we don't have any checks going out the door to someone who claims to be 150 years old but isn't alive anymore. That makes sense. But the way the left reacts to this is, oh no, they're going after your Social Security or auditing the IRS, which is one of the things that DOGE is undertaking right now. We haven't even gotten refund checks this year. We haven't passed April 15th yet. And yet Democrats are saying if your refund checks are delayed, it will be because of DOGE. Ed Morrissey, if you have to conjure up fantasy events, it certainly suggests you don't have anything real to point to.
No, that's exactly correct, right? I mean, that's exactly correct. And it's not as though the IRS doesn't have a few employees that are supposed to be doing these things anyway, and they're going to be doing them. And again, some of this is statutory, some of it's regulatory, and some of it is just done by executive fiat, and that's the stuff that Donald Trump can stop.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, if Democrats want to run on, save the IRS in 2026, I mean, God bless you.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of did, right? I mean, this is about the IRS that cracks me up. You know, Democrats were screaming about Elon Musk and his DOGE team are going to have access to your personal records at the IRS and at Social Security, and it's the same people screaming about this that wanted that were cheering Joe Biden for hiring 87,000 people to come into the IRS to take a look at your personal information so that they can audit you.
Right.
I mean, there's no consistency to this.
Yeah.
And the level of hysteria over this is absolutely absurd. The problem is that they just didn't expect them to do it.
I know.
And they built some of these systems. I mean, the U.S. DOGE service is a great example of this. Barack Obama created that. He created it so it didn't have congressional oversight, and he created it so that they could go through and look at all the different, IT systems throughout the federal government, ostensibly to improve them, but more just to, promote activism, progressive activism throughout the federal government.
Yes.
Trump largely ignored it in the first term because he didn't really understand what it was. But he understands it now, and so he took it over. He renamed it the U.S. DOGE Service, but it's the same organization, brought in Elon Musk's team to go through and do exactly what they were supposed to be doing, which is looking at all the different IT systems throughout the federal government, only this time to take a look where the money was going.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I love that Obama created this, and now we can use it to make the government more efficient. And that's not at all what Obama intended for it to be, which is the best thing ever.
It is. It's one of the great dunks of all time. I mean, honestly, I'm enjoying the heck out of this. But it does also point out the fact that when you give the executive branch that much power, somebody at some point is going to come along and use it for stuff you don't like, which is the reason why it's a good idea to have checks and balances, to make sure you're not making the executive branch too large, so that Congress has a chance to take a look at some of the actions there. This is not just the Obama years, it's not just the Biden years. This is like 100 years or more of agency law where Congress basically conceded most of its authority to the executive branch. This is what happens.
Yeah, it's funny, too, to think about that. What President Trump is doing right now is reasserting executive authority as found in the United States Constitution while simultaneously shrinking the government. The doomsday scenario is always like, oh, no, we're going to have somebody who thinks he's a king come in and then assume power over everybody's lives. Trump's doing the opposite. He's coming in and saying, look, Article 2 grants these powers to the executive branch, and I'm going to use them to cut the fat.
Not just Article 2. And if it was just Article 2, we wouldn't have this problem. The problem is that Congress passed enabling statutes for all of these agencies, and with all sorts of and legislation underneath them, with all sorts of language like the Secretary shall determine, the Secretary shall determine, the Secretary shall determine. Obamacare is practically a master class in this.
Yeah.
In which Congress basically conceded all of their power and authority to executive branch appointees at HHS, in all of these different places. So Trump is using that authority to do the exact same thing. And they're fit to be tied over it, but they're the ones that created this. And again, not just the recent Congresses. This goes back to Woodrow Wilson. Mm-hmm. They've been doing this since Woodrow Wilson. It's just been getting worse and worse and worse over the years. And Trump is finally going to make progressives pay for it. And they're not happy.
Okay, so tell me about what corporate America is up to, because it seems like, everything from the tech company CEOs showing up to the inauguration to committing to stopping all of the censorship they've been doing of the American people to, even as I mentioned at the outset of the segment, Disney is now reeling back on all of its so-called DEI initiatives, which are just a euphemistic way of saying bigotry. And they're getting rid of, even the trigger warnings that they were airing on Disney Plus ahead of movies like Dumbo and Peter Pan. What is happening here, Ed Morrissey?
Well, they're falling in line with the dominant political culture. I mean, progressives have always been on the fringe. It's just that they have never had to pay for that. There's something interesting, too, today. GSA today, apparently, or early today or late yesterday, announced that they were going to remove the requirement that federal agencies have to consider federal contractors' DEI policies before granting contracts. And they're not saying that companies can't do DEI, but what they're saying is that the federal government is no longer going to incentivize it. And I think that is something that is going to make corporate America just happy as all get out, because I don't think they ever really wanted those things. It's just that's where the money was. And so you ask, well, why are all these people showing up for Trump and donating to the Trump inauguration? It's because that's where they perceive the money's going to be. It's certainly where the power is going to be exercised. And Donald Trump has made it very clear that he's really going to exercise that power. And they don't want to be on the other side of it.
Yeah, they don't. And the reality, of course, they also have the threat looming over them of the various agencies who may judge them for that bigotry and say, hey, wait a second, this is illegal. Like some of this stuff that these companies have been pushing, most people would say, well, that's flatly illegal according to the Civil Rights Act. This idea that you would judge people or hire people based on the color of their skin. What are you doing? Right. And now you actually have an administration in place who knows what the law is and is willing to enforce it.
I think that's certainly part of it, right? And that's certainly like the stick, right? But honestly, I think with the carrot being removed for DEI policies, they're not interested in doing it. And there's a good reason for that, because it creates all sorts of headaches internally. It creates all sorts of friction between, presumed identity groups about who's getting what and who's got priority over who. And most businesses don't really want to deal with that. No. All they want to do is hire good people to get the job done. That's really all they really want to focus on. Now, there are some activist companies out there that like this stuff. Nobody's telling them they can't do it. But until now, the threat of regulation or prosecution, whatever you want to say, government intervention was on the side of not doing DEI. If you weren't doing DEI, you were at risk for doing that. Well, now, if you are doing DEI, there's a risk for that. But actually, I think with the incentives removed, they're all going to say, that's great. I don't want to do this. We never wanted to do it in the first place. We were just doing it to get by.
Yeah.
And I think the incentives are now set properly, and these companies are going to do what most companies do, which is to focus on making money and returning value for shareholders.
Yeah, well, that's long overdue, because I've been saying for years, I'm like, really? There's a profit incentive in this madness? And I guess there must have been. I wasn't a part of giving my money to it, though. Ed Morrissey, thank you. Really appreciate your time, sir. All right, Senator Markwayne Mullin has a useful X account because he constantly tells you what's coming next in the United States Senate on the schedule. And he reports that Kash Patel is set to be confirmed by Thursday of this week. It's well overdue for us to have a Senate-confirmed FBI director, yet here we are. Senator Sheldon Whiteclub is very angry about all of this. He doesn't think Kash Patel should have that job at all.
There are three reasons why Kash Patel is extremely dangerous. One is all of his wild MAGA behavior. This is a guy whose judgment is beyond questionable. It's appallingly bad.
Yeah, says the senator who's wearing a zip-up turtleneck under his suit jacket. His judgment is appallingly bad.
We have a lot of quarrel about whether his enemies list is an enemies list.
Sheldon Whiteclub, he's unbelievable. He's really a detestable human being. And he doesn't like Kash Patel, which is yet another endorsement of Kash Patel to become the next director of the FBI. There's a lot of news breaking today at the Department of Justice. A lot of the Biden-era holdovers are either being fired or they're quitting in protest today. It's great news. Our friend Julie Kelly is very excited about that. I'll try and share some of that coming up with you in the next hour. Also, Ronald Mortensen will be with us, former Assistant Secretary of State and a man with the Center for Immigration Studies. He's going to talk to us about how the Trump administration can actually expedite deportations. I think they're very open to the advice. They love anything that helps them deport foreign nationals who are here illegally. That's ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show.